Second case tonight of obstruction. Richard Nixon. He was supposed to be in office until early 1977, but he had to resign a few years early after an investigation into the Watergate affair ended with obstruction findings and an impending impeachment. I spoke with Professor Chris Edelson at American University about the role of obstruction in the downfall of America's 37th president. Professor Edelson, how did Watergate in the Nixon era make obstruction of justice a household crime that people actually knew about?
Well, it was in the articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon. President Nixon ultimately resigned from office, but what moved him in that direction was impeachment proceedings had begun. The House Judiciary Committee voted, with both Republicans and Democrats voting in favor of impeachment. It was clear he was going to be impeached and removed from office. When you impeach a president, members of Congress draft articles of impeachment. This is kind of like an indictment in a criminal case, although impeachment, of course, is not a criminal case, but it's sort of analogous to it. And so you have to name specific charges. And one of the articles of impeachment was for obstruction of justice.
At that time, was it as well known as it is today?
Unless you're practicing criminal law, John Dean, I don't think did. It's not something you would know the details about. I'm sure he had heard of it. But what he probably meant is he didn't know exactly how it worked and exactly what it meant to obstruct justice. And I think, at that time, certainly, unless you're an expert, and today, to an extent, that's probably true, too, you wouldn't necessarily know the details of what's required.
Do you get the sense at that time, knowing what we now know, maybe 40 years later, that obstruction was pretty much everywhere surrounding Nixon?
I think, yes, what was going on in the Nixon administration was clearly an attempt to subvert the workings of justice. That President Nixon and his advisors and his staff were trying to undermine an investigation into Watergate and related activities, including but not limited to by firing the special prosecutor, a man named Archibald Cox, when he was trying to get tapes from the White House. So I think, yes, this is what they were doing. Did they know that's what they were doing? I take them at their word. I think I don't second guess it. I think probably if they thought they were doing something, as you say, that was political and they didn't necessarily realize it was criminal. Unfortunately, that's not a legal defense.
So back then and still today, many people make the legal argument that a president cannot be prosecuted while in office for something like obstruction. But according to what you've told me, that is grounds for impeachment.
Can a president be indicted in court while in office? It's not 100% clear. The Constitution doesn't specifically say. I think most lawyers conclude no, that the president can't, that the process that's available is impeachment and removal from office, and then the president could be prosecuted. When Richard Nixon resigned, he could have been prosecuted then. Gerald Ford pardoned him, though. So I think that's probably the way it would work.
If you were special counsel today in the White House, what would your advice be to the Trump team?
Well, it may be too late, unfortunately. I think Steve Bannon said, I forget his exact words, but he said the biggest mistake, something like the biggest mistake in the modern presidency was Donald Trump firing Jim Comey. That may well be for a couple of reasons. One, because firing Comey himself might be part of the obstruction of justice case. And two, because that led to the appointment of the special counsel. You can't undo those things. The only thing I would advise at this point as a lawyer is, cooperate with the process, figure out what's going on, try to identify what liability may exist, make decisions based on that. But I think a lot of the damage, unfortunately, may already be done.